Welcome to Broadcasting Common Ground, the Deep Foundation Institute's podcast channel. In this series, Interview with a Trailblazer, hosts Tim Siegel and Lucky Nagarajan will be talking with leaders who forged their own paths within the Deep Foundation's industry.
Welcome to DFI's podcast, Broadcasting Common Ground. I'm Tim Siegel, and I'm glad to be here with our co-host, Lucky Nagarajan. Hi, Lucky.
Hey, Tim. Great to be here.
And welcome, DFI podcast listeners. This is the first episode of our new series called Interview with a Trailblazer. In this podcast, we want to encourage, inspire, and edify. The fact is, we are all constantly asked to take on new challenges, whether at work or at school or at home. Given this, it can be helpful to hear the stories and the wisdom from others who have taken on new challenges and have overcome. We call them trailblazers. Lucky, today we are going to talk about maximizing your value in the workforce. And specifically, we are going to talk about women in industry with our guest. We acknowledge that gender can be a controversial subject. So I think we need to share with our listeners the spirit in which we offer this podcast.
You bet, Tim. It's all about we. And there is no them and us. Well, nobody is perfect, but we believe that everyone strives to be the best employee, best coworker, and best supervisor they can be. This is a complicated issue. And asking the questions is valuable even if we don't have all the answers.
That's awesome. Thank you, Lucky.
And our trailblazer in the podcast is Jennifer Hudock, who has enjoyed a very successful career, and she is now the marketing communications manager with Aldridge Electric. I think we can all agree that women of a certain age can remember when men were dominant in supervisory roles. It has changed in recent years, but it could be argued that some bias still remains. Jennifer is going to share with us her challenges and give us all advice on how to overcome that.
Super. Lucky, could you tell us a little bit more about what Jen will be talking about?
Yes, Tim. Jen is remarkable, and she will be talking about her journey within Aldridge, challenges that she has faced, her colleagues who have helped along her journey, company transformation, which is my favorite, and constant need of each of us to examine ourselves. And the best thing is to bring us out the best in each other as well.
That sounds so awesome. That's exciting. Okay, so let's introduce Jen. Jen, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so in our pre-show warm-up, we learned that you were born and raised in Chicago. Can you give us a little bit of history on how you ended up pursuing a career in foundations, power transmission, and really the overall utility industry?
Certainly. So I'm born and raised in Chicago. I'm from the Northwest side, and I grew up in a very blue-collar neighborhood that was full of a lot of construction workers and EMTs, firefighters, and policemen. My father himself was a tuck pointer. So from an early age, I was introduced to that sort of lifestyle.
Wait, now what was your dad? Tell me.
He was a tuck pointer.
You got to explain that to me.
I have no idea.
So it's sort of a lost art, I will tell you. But when you look at the beautiful facades with brick laying, it's really the retransformation of that to ensure the integrity of architecture is maintained, which really fits into living in Chicago and growing up surrounded by beautiful architecture. Really kind of gave me the idea that construction might be something I would be interested in. So when I had an opportunity to work in something sort of related to architecture, I jumped on it, and little did I know that it would parlay into a career that would eventually lead me into the power and energy world.
Wow. Okay. So just so the tuck pointer, it sounds like it's a combination of like skill and probably a good bit of labor. Is that correct? Is that fair to
Absolutely.
say?
Yes.
Okay. And has some,
Scaffolding, the side of the, scaling the sides of buildings to repair some brickwork. Absolutely. Lots of labor involved.
wow. That, and I could see how that would be inspiring. So in a way, you kind of feel like you followed in your dad's footsteps, at least going into the construction industry.
It gave me a sense of connection to him. I did lose my father at a very young age, and I was 7 years old when he passed. So having those memories kind of disappear out of my mind the older I got, any memory or anything I could cling to that would help me feel connected to him certainly was attractive.
Gotcha. And so maybe that was part of the motivation. Let me. So when you started to tell your friends or maybe your teachers, at some point telling others that you were interested in probably going into a career that at the time was mostly male dominated, did you get some feedback?
I never really considered any challenges that being in a very male dominated industry would present because of the gender. Growing up surrounded by like-minded construction individuals, I just immediately kind of felt that sense of belonging. So I can't say that I really dealt with any of that feedback from my family and friends about being a woman in a role in the
Yeah,
construction world.
that's great to hear. That's really great to hear.
Yeah. And Jen, you just mentioned about losing your dad at an early age. Do you have any memories of going with him to any of his job sites?
Not when he was a tuck pointer. That work was very seasonal, as a lot of construction work can be. And some of my memories just were of emulating him. I've got some great photos mowing my bubble mower next to him while he's mowing the lawn. And he was a fast freight driver in the off season, so I remember being with him on some shorter trips and things like that. But never got to see the tuck pointing in action, as far as I remember, at least.
Yeah, yeah. And I can imagine like now when I walk through New York in the urban setting and in between the buildings, when I see someone doing something like that, now I will think about you and your dad always. I always would think like, when people were up there doing something and the scaffolds and stuff, I would always feel like, oh my God, that is such a cool job. That's such a cool job. So now I know. And clearly now we see that you're a very good storyteller. You're a good storyteller, and I do know that you're a good journalist. We will get to it in a little bit. Were you always like that, or how did you realize that you were a good storyteller and journalist and build those skills along the way?
My family will tell you I was born a storyteller. I have a flair for the dramatics, and that became very apparent at a young age. They really thought I would pursue a career in acting, and my nickname was Sarah the actress because of my dramatics. But I really started with a love for writing, like very early on in school with the Young Authors Program, and that was shortly thereafter noticed by the middle school paper, where they asked me to become a journalist. I shortly thereafter became the editor of that paper. Then when I entered high school, I had the opportunity to take some honors journalism classes and become a journalist for that school paper, and then eventually be moved on to an editor.
Mhm.
And I had mentioned that my dad passed when I was very young. So I was very lucky in my life to have two fathers bless my life. My mother met my second father when I was 11 years old, and he really was with me through my formative years and helped to nurture the writer within me. He would rip up things I would write and tell me I could do better, and I would storm away in the throes of puberty, very angsty towards him. But I appreciate that drive that he built inside of me. And when I started my career and started, moving through different roles, he would tell me, "You're not even hitting your potential here yet. You really should be the company reporter." And I unfortunately lost that dad several years ago. So the fact that I am actually now the company reporter I'll get a little emotional talking about it, but it's really kind of another, nod to my father pushing me in that way.
No, that's a wonderful, wonderful, inspiring story, I would say. A lot of daughters can relate to some of the things that you just mentioned, how you get into the careers that you get into, and then, how you shape your future just from that one person in your family, right? It can be father or mother, or it can be both. That was wonderful. I want to get to the heart of the conversation. You've been in the industry for the last 16 years, and over that time there has been a great deal of change in our society, and also work culture and work environment. What was it like for you when you started out? And in 16 years where you are today, what are some of the differences that you have noticed, or you notice every day, that exist today?
I would say that the changes are very noticeable, and I'll get into that. But for a very long time, I just really felt like an unnurtured talent, starting out, starting as an intern, you just, your foot is in the door and you're kind of willing to do the grunt work, whatever it takes to be seen and appreciated for the work that you can provide. And at that time, there was a lot of volatility in the economy. We were heading into a recession time. So I fell into an administrative role, and that brought a lot of barriers to overcome, and get my colleagues to recognize the other talents that I could bring to the table. As a woman, I feel that it's easy to be seen as nothing more than an admin, and I worked really hard over the years to help break that prejudice. But today, I would say it's pretty rare that I see women in our company and in the industry overall being overlooked simply for their gender. And that thought is really a breath of fresh air. So it's just that every day being included in a conversation, seeing other women leaders be recognized, and right at the same level with their male counterparts. It wouldn't be anything that I would have imagined we would have equality in today. And it's really nice to see.
Oh yeah, that is very true. I remember some of the things that you said. When you go to a meeting, you're expected to take notes because you're good at taking notes. That's the polite way of saying, like, yes, you're good at taking notes. Why don't you just take notes? And I think, there has been so many times that when I have been in the construction industry and being in the field, with so many contractors, have also had so much of backup from the team members who've been on site to make sure to tell the others who are working with me that I am the boss. She is an engineer and she is the boss, and she knows what she's talking about, and you have to pass the tests and everything else that you do on site through her. I've had a project where that happened, and that was like, I was super happy to hear that someone was telling everyone else, like 120 construction workers, and I was the only female engineer, and that was such a breath of fresh air. So it's clearly, as you said, there has been a transformation.
I mean, that's
absolutely
that's encouraging to hear. I mean, I do remember, and I went to school, 35 years ago or longer, but I do remember that the ratio at Georgia Tech, I think it was 7 guys to 1, and that's in the entire school. And then when you got into engineering, it was more like 20 guys to 1 female. And it's much better as we begin to balance. I thought and Lucky, you had suggested this early on when we had this idea to have this podcast, is to bring in a few statistics, and I think that's a great idea. I in tongue in cheek, I remember what Mark Twain used to say about statistics. He said, "There's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics," and kind of a tongue in cheek that you can make them out to be what you want them to be. But with that, some are very informative. And one of the things that you brought up, Lucky, was a U.S. Census Bureau 2021 report that said that only 17% of full-time civil engineers were female. So that kind of gives you a feel of the imbalance, and and then you might say to yourself, well, what if we break it down with ethnicity? It basically comes out the same. It really is. So it does go even kind of cross-culturally in some respects. My own anecdotal and unscientific observation is that certainly throughout my career, men have historically dominated STEM fields. But it's changing. And not only is it changing, but the rate of change is increasing. And so you're really seeing, I mean, I think just even recently, looking at like the DFI, some of the scholarships that were given, oh my gosh, lots of young ladies are choosing the STEM path. And so anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there as we're talking about it.
Yeah, true, Tim. I think, that there was a reason why we were looking at the statistics too. And it's really nice that you mentioned DFI and Womenity Foundations, the trust and everything else in the scholarship. So we give Womenity Foundations gives 5 or 6 development grants every year. And we had, before COVID, we used to see a lot of applications. And in the last few years, the applications had gone down. And this year, we got 28 applications. And when we review the applications from the young women who have been in the industry and students who are thinking about coming to the industry, like it just really warms my heart to see the passion they have and the reason why they're getting into this industry, and the people who are actually influencing them to get into this industry. It's remarkable. It's remarkable to see how that is changing. So there is
question. And with great impact, which is, it's not that, I mean, there's no indication that the doors have been opened and then basically it's just for namesake. There's every indication that these changes that are happening have great impact, and those women that are moving into it are taking full advantage of the opportunity they've got, which is really a credit to them. And
definitely Jen can relate to this as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's an old adage that says that women have to work twice as hard as men to be thought of as half as good. This gives me a laugh every time I think about this. At some point in my career, I saw this and have felt it for sure. Even today, I feel like, oh my God, I have to take care of this a little bit more, cross a little bit more. Jen, you had referenced the World Economic Forum's 2022 Global Gender Gap Index report in your recent ADSA article, which was titled "The Key to Overcoming Imposter Syndrome: Become a Women in Construction."
All right. So we do need to explain to our audience what is the imposter syndrome. So, Jen, could you help me there?
Yes, I sure can. I would say really at its bedrock, it's self-doubt, right? It's really about not embracing and leaning into your successes that you work so hard to achieve. So it really goes back to feeling like you have to work twice as hard for that achievement. And when you do finally get the success, you're like, is this actually happening to me? Can I take credit for this, or is it built on the success of someone else? So it's about overcoming that self-doubt and building confidence to lean into your achievements.
So the imposter syndrome in this case would be felt by the woman in construction, that her success and abilities are not due to herself, but she feels like she somehow fooled other people, or perhaps somebody else for that impression. Is that kind of what I'm gathering?
I would say in general, that is the definition, but being in construction, I think, helps to eliminate all of that because the construction industry offers a lot of self-confidence boosting opportunities, and you really feel empowered to take ownership of what you're doing. If you are, a craft laborer and your boots on the ground and you're proud of what you're working on. There's no one who could take credit for the part that you had in that. And that's really what the article focused on was, are you having that self-doubt? Do you feel like you're an imposter? Well, here's one way to reconsider that. Join the construction industry because we're lifting each other up and we're offering a pathway to that self-confidence to help empower your career through here and in the industry overall.
Well, let me ask you, since you brought that up, what are you seeing? Do you in the circle that you operate in, are you seeing women entering in the trades as well as in perhaps in the engineering side, or is it one or the other that's more dominant?
I would say in general, we've seen a large influx of women entering the industry, both on the trade side and engineering, estimating, construction management, and project management. And the construction industry is offering those opportunities to continue to grow your skill set and just really, empower yourself and your career growth by giving endless opportunities at a time when infrastructure is just booming.
Yeah. I want to go back to the conversation you and Tim were having regarding the imposter syndrome. As we were talking, Jen, I think the article was also focused on imposter syndrome and also was talking about how to overcome that. So what was the point in your career that you felt like you were victim of this imposter syndrome, and how did you overcome that?
I would say I spent a large portion of my career feeling that way. I mentioned that we dealt with some economic volatility early on in my career, and that kind of pigeonholed me into an administrative role when the industry was stagnant and new work wasn't rolling in. I was very thankful to just continue to be working at a time when so many others weren't. So I tried not to let it affect me. I used the opportunity to grow my family and focus on family life instead of leaning into career growth at the time. And that afforded me the opportunity to start to move throughout the company and take on different roles. So it was when I started, once my children were born and I started kind of bouncing around the company and picking up different skills, that started to empower me a little bit more. Like, okay, I don't just need to be considered an admin, or an office manager or someone who just can always, get it done. What needs to get done, I can be thought of as strategic and a partner to be brought into conversations and help guide. I think the switch really changed for me when I moved into an executive assistant position where I had exposure to senior leadership and executives. And, without a doubt, my boss, a man, right, who knew me for many years, said, okay, Jen, let's lead this meeting. And that surprised me that he was offering that to me. So that sparked something in me and made me start to think of myself in a different way. Like, okay, maybe I can do this and I don't need to be held in this position. And if I could do that, what else can I do? And I kept, I set out on this journey to be a continuous student and always learn and enhance my skills. And I use the small company family feel of Aldridge to dip my toe into other areas. And that gave me some opportunity to partner with other departments. And it was then when I started moving into the marketing department and was sort of plucked and poached to move over there. And that gave me a whole different voice and a whole different means to showcase my talents in in the company. And I think that really it's just like exploded from there. I've had endless opportunities to try new things and be a part of really important company initiatives, be a part of industry initiatives as the industry changes and grows. So it's really just been quite a journey that's happened with many big milestones along the way.
Yeah, that's such a great feeling. That's such a great feeling when someone recognizes your potential and says, like, no, you're more than what you can be, and pushes you in the right direction. And that's where, doors open up for you. And then that's where you actually start getting into your mind and saying, like, you are the best in what you do. That was wonderful, wonderful to hear. I want to go back to the 2022 Gender Gap Index report, which actually said at the current rate of progress, the global gender gap will be closed in 132 years. It also reports that top 10 economies have closed at least 80% of their gender gaps, with Iceland being 90.8%, leading the global ranking. More regionally, if we think about North America, they have closed 76.9% of its gender gap, which is followed by Europe, which is 76.6%. As we have seen in the last few years or so in this industry itself has developed awareness and has become, the leader in leading and making strides. Can you share with us your take on this? This was, for the listeners, this is the ADSC magazine. That was, what edition was that, Jen? The edition
that was the Women in Construction.
Yeah.
Yep.
So can you share your take on this regarding this report and what it was included?
Sure. When I sat down to write that article, I really had to think about what angle I wanted to take. And I knew that talking at least for a moment about the wage gap needed to be included in it. And, the wage gap is real and women see it everywhere. There's a lot of inequities in every industry, and in every part of the country. And I think that, in fact, the construction industry is making large strides to close that gap and recognize women for their contributions and not for their gender identity. That's without even considering labor laws, right? So if you are thinking about getting into the trades, like there's nothing better if you want equality in pay than something that they have to disclose what everyone is making.
Yeah, that is true. And I feel like, I want to ask you also, like, how do you see this gender gap within Aldridge? And I know in the article also, it did mention that Aldridge has taken the strides to close the gender gap. What were the strides they were able to take and help people understand, the equity behind gender gap and the equity behind closing the gender gap?
I'll be very transparent with you guys. I think that, like many companies, any DEI effort starts a little self-serving, right? It's something that that you have to do, and you get your executive and senior leadership buy-in, but then where do you begin? And as we started to grapple with how we were going to approach this, and create a more diverse workforce, we started making some pointed efforts to change, and that very quickly was able to bring us different perspectives and skill sets that really have helped us foster and drive innovation, deliver safety solutions, and allow us to serve our customers better, which really is our core values here at Aldridge. So it was an easy transition of thought to think we really need to bring in more diverse candidates, and how can we make an effort to do that?
Yeah. I think since Women in D Foundation started, I'm going back to Women in D Foundations because since it started, we will be 10 years next year. I can't believe, like, in 10 years, all the things that we've been able to do. At the same time, the members of the committee have gone back to their companies and have requested to start women in the foundation, women in their own companies as a group. And as you said, Jen, I think it all starts from the top. You need to have that top 1 or 2 people involved in that group that you are thinking about making a transformation. I'm not even talking about women in companies. I'm talking about everyone who thinks differently within companies, right? Like, we all think differently. So for us to feel equity and inclusion, there is a lot that has to go behind it. That's very true.
Jen, we understand that your employer, Aldridge Electric, recognized the imbalance of men and women in their organization. You mentioned that, you discussed it, and they took concrete steps to increase the number of women. Tell me, what were some of the indicators that you saw that was being successful, and what overall did it look like?
I would say that we started off very small and with some pointed efforts. We thought, where can we make an impact first, and where can we take it from there? So it was easy for us to point focus to our intern program, since this was temporary employees that would be here. Each year we have increased the number of interns. So this was a couple of years ago now. We said, okay, if we're going to bring more women to the workforce, let's try it with our intern class. And we do hire most of our interns. I myself started here as an intern. So we use that opportunity to start to market to different universities and different majors like that women might lean into. We even had a pink hard hat and now hiring women in construction sign on some of our career booths. So it was a very pointed effort, but that really helped cascade the change throughout the organization. When we saw that, it got initial interest from our executive team, including our chairman of the board, Ken, who was very interested in why we chose to increase the women in our class and how was that working out for us. So we're happy to say that that's really held true over the last several years, where we've brought in more diverse candidates, not just women, into that intern class, because these are the future leaders of not only the industry, but potentially our company. We do like to hire our interns, and eventually that's going to challenge the status quo, even if that imbalance may be present today.
Very true, very true. I do have a question to ask. I want to go back to the internship program. So the interns, what were the tasks like for them? Like, were they working a lot more in the office, or were they going in the field as well?
We offer a wide range of opportunities through our internship program, where you're paired with a mentor, and it's typically a senior level person who's been here for a while, working in a variety of roles from operations, project management, estimating, procurement, marketing, IT development. So there are plenty of opportunities. A lot of our project manager interns, dependent on the project, are field-based. We have safety interns. I recall 2 safety interns, when they gave their presentation, they added up all of the miles that they traveled that summer. They traveled like 2,600 miles over the course of their summer to reach different projects, because that was their internship. They were boots on the ground with the crews on site, doing safety observations. And even in marketing, taking photos and content gathering, creating videos, we offer our intern plenty of opportunities to be out in the field. So, no 2 days are different here at Aldridge. And even if you're hired for a desk job, we make it a point to get our interns out into the field. On their second day, they're already visiting a job site to see the work in action.
Sure. So another question pops up, because you were talking about the field and stuff. Were there any specific changes that Aldridge had to Aldridge had to do for interns to be in the field, and with respect to safety and with respect to anything specifically that they required?
We do give a pretty comprehensive safety orientation prior to them arriving out on site. We adorn them with their proper PPE. That lead-in information before their internship starts lets them know that they need to have steel or composite toe boots and long pants, and the rest we kind of provide to them. So we're not just sending them out there blind, and they're definitely escorted by safety professionals as well as project staff to make sure that they're not, going somewhere they shouldn't or touching something that they shouldn't be touching. So there's a lot of guidance that goes into that, definitely.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. At the same time, I want to hear a little bit more about women in Aldridge. When I read the article again, I'm going back to the ADSC article, women in Aldridge, and I did see a women foreman who was in the picture as well. I want to know more about the program and also about that foreman.
Well, I'm happy to report that Natalie is not our only woman foreman here, and we do have a percentage of women who have management roles in the field, foreman and general foreman, as well as safety management. So we have about 140 women across the company, and when we were leaning into those efforts to bring more women into the industry, those efforts really snowballed into this community, which is our first ever employee resource group that we've named the Women of Aldridge. So it was, loosely started as a peer group, but it really quickly became a fundamental element of our DEI efforts.
What other different activities did you?
Well, throughout the year, we provide different resources. We have newsletters, virtual lunch and learns. We're hosting our very first power hour that's specific to women about the steps to take to empower your career. We also get together and offer job site visits to our more office-based women employees to get them out to see the work. To us, there's really no better way to connect what we do than to just get out onto site and see it. And offering that to someone perhaps in accounting who might not otherwise see it is something that we can offer. And the highlight of the program is really this annual summit that we put together. It's just a day of learning, growing, and networking. Last year kicked off our inaugural summit, and I'm pleased to say that planning for Summit 2023 is well underway. I'm excited to help chair the event that will be taking place in August, and we even include our women interns. We make a point to do it while they're still here so that they get that experience as well.
Just overall, I don't really want to diminish the tremendous efforts by women, and particularly the women at Aldrich and all the women that are moving into it. But, your story, to broaden things a little bit, is applicable to all genders, right? I mean, we've got, Jen, you mentioned coming up, hitting challenges. Think about where you were at, like you said, at the beginning of the recession, 15, 16 years ago, to where you're at now, and you're going with a summit. You mentioned the watershed moment where you were invited to lead a meeting with executives. Your story is about meeting challenges in the workplace, finding a path to overcome, and then finding a way to maximize your value and everyone's value in the industry and society. That recipe is universal.
Absolutely, it is.
With that in mind, Jen, what would you say is your mantra or your keywords of advice for our listeners on how to do what you do and what you have done?
Just never give up. I like to think of myself as this forever student on a journey to being my best self. And, as adults, we know like that journey is not easy, right? But it becomes a part of your story, and that's a story worth telling.
Yeah. And I have to ask you, with all the experience that you've gotten and all the interactions, and the programs that you have been able to be part of, and you're chairing the next summit, which is super exciting. Do you have a crazy story that you would like to share with us?
A
We
crazy
all have
story
crazy
about
stories.
about being a woman in construction, or give me some more context.
any story there. So just as an example, like, being working in different markets. I've worked in a lot of different markets and different culture and environments, and I can think of, like, how crazy it can get at times, working in USA or Brazil or India, or there are a lot of different things. And also, like, in different environments, being very cold or very hot, or being a very exciting person who is working with you, you'll always have stories. So you can share any story that comes to mind.
So that does spark a story for me. As the company journalist, I find myself to be the voice, and I have the honor and privilege of sharing the stories. So we were working on a project in downtown Chicago on our mass transit line, and that work gets done. It's critical work where they shut the system down for 54 hours so that we can work on the rail lines before they re-energize it. So critical work, it's over the course of a weekend so that it doesn't disrupt, commuters of Chicago moving around. And we knew we had to tell this story, and we knew we needed some great photos for it. So, I reached out to the project manager and I said, you got to get me out on this job. And he goes, Jen, it's the middle of winter and it's in a really bad neighborhood in Chicago, and it's going to happen at like 1:00 in the morning. I'm like, okay, what's the question? I asked to go, and he's like, okay, well, if you're okay with all of those conditions, let's go. So, 4 layers later and a thermos full of hot cocoa, I was ready to go. And I spent 6 hours up on the elevated tracks of the west side of Chicago when it was -15 degrees outside, capturing those photos. And we had our crews and subcontractors looking at me as the only woman on site, like, is she okay? Is she going to be okay? I'm like, I'm fine. You want some hot chocolate? Can I take your photo? Like, come on, guys, there's nothing to worry about here. So I'll tell you, I kind of earned some stripes that day with the crew about how I can hang. And it gave me a newfound respect for me through that.
That's awesome. Anybody that can, I like it.
I'm sure Tim has a story too.
Oh, well,
so many stories.
I certainly, I love it. I've spent plenty of times, whether it was extremely cold or extremely hot. I've been on the barge in Charleston, South Carolina in the middle of summer, and I've been in the middle of winter on a river in Norfolk, Virginia. Anybody that's willing to step out there like Jen did and live with the elements, even though your mind is telling you that you want to go inside and take your shoes off and warm up.
Yeah.
That says a lot about your internal fortitude, for sure.
Very true.
Lucky and I have had the pleasure of getting to know Jen Hudock and what she has gone through to be a trailblazer. She was inspired by her 2 dads. She met she came into a workforce where it was male dominated, but she found a way to leverage her skills, and with the help of people recognizing that, and we all need that, she was able to blossom and flourish. And not only that, but reach around and lift others up, which says a lot if you're willing to do that. And we all should aspire to do that. We all need mentors. We need to, the old term, paying it forward. Lucky, tell me something that I've kind of battled with going through this whole discussion, and I'd like to get your opinion. My daughter's in engineering school. She works extremely hard, but she gets folks that will say every once in a while, you're only in the engineering program because you're a woman and they wanted more women. It makes me ill when I hear that, because I know how hard she works. But where do we find that? Where do we find that balance in what we do of saying we want the opportunity, but that we want the opportunity to work hard and prove ourselves, rather than saying we want it to be given to us? Where do we find that balance? Where do you find that balance as a woman?
No, that's very heartbreaking, Tim. That's very heartbreaking to hear that there are people who still say something like that, you know. And to be frank, I have gone through that too.
I would imagine you have. I would imagine most women have
Yeah.
experienced that. I mean, Jen, please chime in. How do you as women? I think that's something that you have to walk that line. And anyway, I wanted both your feedback on that.
I will let
I
Jen
think
talk
that
first.
Yeah, I think that, we never really get away from bullies in life. And some people just are not as kind-hearted as we hope that they may be. So I think that, I'm with Lucky, right? It's really unfortunate that those things are still being said, but I feel like we're moving to a place where that's going to be fewer and far between. And eventually it will no longer be. And we can take steps today as women to be seen differently to help those future generations, just like the women before us. So it's hard not to get discouraged when you hear those things, but ultimately it just makes you a stronger person. And when you persevere through all of that, that's when you are gaining the respect of your colleagues and your male counterparts around you to say, wow, okay, she's a little tougher than I thought, or got that thicker skin, and respect.
Yeah. And one thing I have learned in the last so many years is like, um be noticeable. Be noticeable. That's number one. As man or a woman, I think we all have the problem with talking about what we do. Some men do have, some women do have that knack for bragging what they do. I'm not calling it in a bad way of bragging, but for your daughter, I think when she hears that, it definitely demoralizes her. But at the same time, I think if she can find role models like Jen, so many of the other kinds of role models that we have seen in the industry, if they can be part of something like that, where other role models talk to them and say, this is how I came up to where I am today, that will be a game changer. That is what we are trying to in the industry, do different kinds of activities where we can talk about this and tell them that, hey, this is how I've gotten here. When I started, I was Alice in the Wonderland. I didn't know what I was doing, but then over a period of time, I had so many friends, mentors, and influencers, and this is how I have been able to get there. That is where we should be going, I think. Start them young, talk to them, get there.
I'll tell you what her father says, which is me.
Oh, yes.
When she tells me that somebody told her the only reason why she got into Georgia Tech was she's a woman, I tell her to tell them back is that it's not, Georgia Tech's not tough for getting in, it's tough for getting out.
Let's see how fast you can get out. That's what you should say.
That's right. If you can get out, that's all that matters. Getting in.
No, that was very good. Very good question, Tim. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, Lucky, anything else we need to talk about as we close? Anything we want to bring up with Jen? Or Jen, anything else you want to bring up as we close?
I just want to say, as anybody who's looking to empower their career, be the change that you want to see, right? We talked a lot about how our male counterparts look at women, but there's a whole other side of the story where, women aren't always supporting women either. So I'll leave it as just like be kind and be that change that you want to see. No one gets to success alone. It's all about, having some help along the way, and you'll feel more fulfilled for helping someone else. And there's nothing better than to see success stories play out.
Rise by lifting others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jen. This was wonderful. And I think we really appreciate you being honest and transparent and sharing, who you have become.
Jen,
Thank you.
it's great to have you to kick off our first episode of Interview with a Trailblazer.
I am honored. Thank you all so much for the opportunity. This was amazing.
Cool.
Thank you.
On behalf of DFI, we hope you enjoyed this episode. The views, information, and opinions expressed during Deep Foundation Institute's podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of DFI. DFI does not verify or take responsibility for the accuracy of the information contained, nor does it warrant that the information contained herein is suitable for any general or specific use. The podcast is available for private, non-commercial use only. Editing, modification, or redistribution of this podcast is prohibited. Thank you for your time. Keep on surviving.